So, as we've been talking all this month about Reiki journeys and how to use Reiki for that. And so Robin's going to talk a little bit more about it too.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of things that can be hidden from our own view or eclipsed from our own view, one of the things that we have been talking about in the last couple of weeks are, I'm going to give it a few names and then kind of explain some of the differences. So, because the reason is because you can hear them in the vernacular, in the spiritual world, the metaphysical world, the wellness world. So they kind of have, and they do have different kind of definitions of them. So we have been talking the last couple of weeks about psychic downloads. They can also be called spiritual downloads, intuitive impressions, intuition. I know Colleen talks about it in the kind of viewpoint of imagination as well. And so, when we're talking about these subjects, while intuitive impressions, intuition, and psychic downloads kind of technically can have a different way that they show up for us, they are kind of in a very similar category. So what are we talking about when we're talking about these things? Some of you might already know. Some of you are already well versed in these topics. Some of you are already, have this kind of part of your practice well defined, when they're coming in. Some people are born with these gifts, and throughout their life, maybe there has been a period of time that it has been hidden just through either our family life, culturally created beliefs, all of these things, and to be rediscovered later in life. Some of you may have had them all along. Others may have these pieces to ourselves, but we have them awakened in a different way. So that you'd never thought you were intuitive or something like that. You never thought that you had this piece of you. And some of us have been able to kind of develop them through skill training. So to know that also, if you don't feel like you are inherently intuitive or psychic, or, I hesitate to use that word because we have a kind of a certain idea of what that means. But these kind of spiritual insights or intuitive insights that we have, that's a thing that we can actually also open up through Reiki, open up through spiritual techniques, and build more skill around it. So I think, a lot of us that go through life, I know some of us will really recognize that we were born with these gifts. And then there's others of us that think not intuitive, don't have any of that. And we picture it in a certain way of like that clairvoyant psychic type way that we see in the movies and things like that. But first of all, I want to say is that Reiki energy and Reiki can help to activate these, open them, come into our own awareness of what they are for us. That's kind of the first thing that I want to say. The second thing that I want to say is the really amazing thing about Reiki is whether or not you're even interested in this subject, Reiki works anyway. So that's the other thing that I want to say too, is that Reiki is going to do the work anyways, and none of it is dependent. Reiki energy, Reiki sessions, self Reiki, all of those things, none of it is dependent on if you're interested in this topic or if you may not want to explore that side of it. So that's kind of the first thing. So, what are they when we're talking about them? So they can kind of show up to us in a variety of ways. So, some of us might see them in more of a vision style. And when I say vision, I don't mean just like seeing, it's more of a perception. It can be a thinking moment. Some of us might have them come to us in dreams. I know for me, that's definitely not the way that I receive any sort of my intuitive impressions. My dreams are weird, and I let go of that a long time ago. But some of us may receive the kind of intuitive impressions and dreams, walks in nature. You might be very aware of how your intuition works for you. Also, they can come in randomly. You know, we could kind of think of them as those like eureka moments where this idea, this kind of maybe you've been asking questions around something and the answers just suddenly pop into your knowing. So they can kind of come in all different ways. They can come in sessions, either for ourselves. Sometimes they come in for sessions for others. When we're doing self Reiki, all of these things, they can show up with them. So also they can be intuitive insights, kind of having a gut feeling before something happens. That's an intuitive impression. You know, I know one thing that people talk about a lot is, you know, you're really thinking about a friend, or you're going to text a friend or call a friend, and then all of a sudden they call you or text you or something like that. So that's another place where you can kind of have those intuitive impressions, those kind of psychic impressions before they actually happen. Others can find it through writing. So journaling, that's another way. We talk about automatic writing in this class, or free writing in this class. Some people can experience it after yoga or meditation. So there's all of these different ways that you can experience these intuitive impressions or psychic downloads. Now, I want to say too, is that one of the ways that we experience spiritual downloads or think about spiritual downloads in kind of these modalities is that sometimes these downloads are just a ton of information that come into your being. So I think that that's a way that they are defined kind of commonly, is that, and that's how many of us think of them. And they are that we just have like the whole thing just can download, whether it's an insight to yourself, a healing. Sometimes people talk about it like Colleen talks about the gratitude ceremony that like we'll be doing in November, how that was just a download and she just knew what that was and saw what that was. We also might just have these little inklings, or like maybe it's a sentence. Those are kind of those intuitive impressions. Those can also be considered downloads. So they have a wide kind of spectrum as far as what they are. And so that's the other thing to kind of know about them, is that they can be a sentence, they can be a knowing, or like this, like again, that eureka moment of a question that you've been asking for a while in your spiritual work, or they can be an entire thing, like an article or this entire thing that can just fully download into your being. So one of the things that Reiki can do is that Reiki, because it is a spiritually guided life force energy, and it is that connection into these kind of either higher self, as we know, like the mental emotional symbol is really about listening to that higher self as well. The distance symbol is not just distance between sending Reiki between one person to another, it's that too, but it is also that connection to source consciousness. It's that bridge of light, that connection to source consciousness. So Reiki, and not to forget the power symbol, it helps with all of these things as well. But so Reiki, just by the natural frequency of the energy, starts to connect us into these either higher levels of consciousness or deeper levels of inner truth, deeper levels of insight within you, hearing you connecting into that intuition that we all have within us. And that's the other thing to know, is that all of us have these kind of senses within us. It may manifest differently for each of us. And so that's one of the things that, you know, many people talk about. We have a free booklet on our website that you can look at. We've written articles about it, is that we all have different ways that our intuition kind of manifests to us. So those would be like the clair senses. So some of us can be that clairvoyant, where we get kind of that visual ideas of our intuition. Others of us are like the claircognizant or clairintellect, where we think our intuition. And then, you know, clairempathy. So there's a bunch of different clair senses. And one of the things about Reiki energy and the knowledge of the clairsenses is this starts to awaken you to your own intuition. And they can be a combination of these things. And you kind of start to hear you. So either through Reiki sessions, the healing of those layers that can be lifted from you, you get deeper and deeper into that authentic part of yourself, that authentic nature, that authentic self. Also, you can have that deeper connection that Reiki can help you to, the world around us, to nature, to others. And so that's a part of the Reiki energy. One of the reasons that we really talk about this is because it's one of the things that, you start to see in Reiki classes and Reiki 1. Reiki sessions for self, people can start to have these intuitive impressions for themselves, and Reiki 2 for others. That's a really common place that they show up, that they can be like, well, I was really drawn to your knee. And somebody would say, oh, that's because, I have knee pain. Or many people in the attunements or the placements, they start to see colors, or they might even just have like a kind of a quick intuitive impression, whether that's like a knowing, a vision, or something like that when they're in the attunement or experience process. So the Reiki energy and this attunement to this kind of this life force energy, this spiritually guided life force energy, starts to awaken it within us. And some of us don't have that day one. We just like to mention that because we know that it's something that happens for people. And we see it kind of continually. Other people, it might develop like along the way. And they may not see it within their Reiki sessions or their Reiki attunements, but they kind of notice that they're having these like those eureka moments more often, or just this kind of higher knowledge or wisdom is opening up within their being. So there's all of those places that Reiki starts to activate it within us, starts to also make us more aware of it, right? Because sometimes we have these things happening, but we don't necessarily notice it, or we dismiss it. Like, oh, that was just a coincidence. And then you kind of start to notice the trend of like, oh, this is happening more and more. So maybe this is something that is starting to like process through me, this spiritual guidance that I am receiving, that I'm noticing. So, the other thing is that Reiki can open up within us, just in general, like that's part of what the energy can do for us. But the other thing is that if we don't necessarily recognize within ourselves that we're intuitive, I know for me, I'm such a linear left brain thinker in general, that I never thought that I was intuitive. And also having Colleen as a mother, who really is, kind of more of that, what we think of as intuitive, or even kind of on the level of psychic, although I don't know if she would consider herself that, that I was like, well, if I'm not like that, then I must not be intuitive. But it turns out that actually through the Reiki energy and through skills training, learning how to Reiki journey, healing the layers that covered this idea that I'm not intuitive through our culturally created beliefs, that because I like an Excel spreadsheet, I therefore can't be intuitive. So healing those layers and getting back to that, listening within myself, listening to my gut instincts, listening to my higher self, really connecting the Reiki energy and through Reiki journeying, really helping me connect into the higher self, that divine, being able to actually go into the journeys like we just did and ask my questions and receive my answers. That's super helpful because I can, even if I never thought that I was intuitive, it's so validated through that work and through the Reiki work, whether you choose to, learn the skills of journeying or not. that, you can go in and receive your answers, and I can free write, I can automatic write. And what we mean when we say about automatic writing, essentially you're in that Reiki state and you're just allowing your pen to paper without evaluating it. So you just kind of start to let it flow, and you just allow whatever comes through to come through with no judgment and no evaluation. And so that's a process again, and that's one of the things that we start to teach in day one of Next Step Reiki, which is learning about Reiki journey techniques, is automatic writing. Because for those of us that don't necessarily think that we're connected into our intuition, it can be super helpful to just let go of all of those layers and allow yourself to write and see what comes through. And then to find out that the things that come through are that kind of higher self coming through, are those intuitive impressions that come through, are those kind of psychic downloads that come through. So it can help to answer your questions. It can really help to these connecting back into your intuitive impressions, these psychic downloads. What they can do for you is really connect you in to your higher self, again, into that inner self as well. They help with your creativity, your wellness. Sometimes with them, you just might say yes and you're not sure why yet. And then finally down the road, you realize like, oh, that's why I said yes way back when. So then the other thing that is about this subject is it's like one thing to know about them, but then it's another thing to like, wait, when do I know that I'm having one? So when does that perceiving come in? And sometimes that's a piece of it that can take time. Like you kind of, again, you start to notice that pattern after a certain amount of time, that it's like, oh, wait, maybe this is my intuition speaking to me. Maybe this is kind of an intuitive or spiritual impression that is outside of like what I'm thinking about. Maybe this is a download, maybe even just that one sentence or that eureka moment. You kind of just realize that you are having these kind of downloads, and to realize that they are these spiritual or intuitive impressions that are coming through. And those things can happen anywhere. So, you can have those eureka moments when you're driving, when you're cooking, when you're in the shower, like that. The cooking piece happens to me all the time, where they can come in these different places. I know Danny's talked about when she's driving, that's a place that it can really come in. Many people, it's when they're out in nature, like I said, they're walking out in nature, and it's kind of like all of these pieces will just come together in this eureka moment. So, but it is can be for many of us, not for everybody, but it can be for many of us, kind of that perceiving piece is part of where we have the hardest time, especially if we never thought of ourselves as intuitive. We have these culturally created beliefs to work through. That's another place where Reiki can really help us to release the layers in our perceiving of them, what they are, believing ourselves. Am I making this up? That whole, conversation. And to be honest, that sometimes the validation with those things really helps. I know that we in these kind of fields, we talk about how, oh, we shouldn't need validation. But when you're first starting out in learning what it means to you, when you're first starting out to know what it looks like for you, that validation can be really helpful, because what it does for you is it kind of teaches you to trust yourself. Like, oh, even if you notice it after the fact, even if you didn't pay attention to it in the moment, but after the fact, like, oh, I was right there. That validation can start to help you trust yourself more in the moment, and trust your own intuition in the moment. And then, of course, we have the discernment. So that's another piece that you kind of start to learn about yourself with these spiritual insights, the intuitive impressions, the psychic downloads. is the discernment. So, and this kind of comes in different ways in each of the clair senses. So I'm going to just speak about clair intellect because that is a really big piece of my intuition. So I know about it really well. So what happens when you're an overthinker? What happens when you have, anxiety or maybe worry? So how do you discern when it's like your intuition or a gut feeling or a spiritual insight? How do you discern when it's that versus maybe those other parts of you that is in your thinking, that is in your anxiety, things like that? So how do you go into that discernment process? That's another place that Reiki can really help with it, because it's going into the healing aspects of all of those things, such as overthinking, anxiety, worry, those kinds of things, bringing us more and more into our wellness, and helping you to discern when there is the places where you're actually having those spiritual insights. And so that's kind of a process. Again, that's through the healing of the layers and through the revealing of like more and more of your authentic self, more and more of your authentic nature, and also getting to know your clair sense better. The Reiki journeying can help. Reiki energy does it by itself, but I will say the Reiki journey can help accelerate it because you get to know those pieces of yourself a bit faster. You get to know those pieces of yourself in a really deep level at, I would say, just an accelerated rate. The other one that I see people kind of wonder about that discernment process is the clair empathy. Of course, so many of us that are drawn to this work are like just naturally empathic. That's part of the reason that we're drawn to this work and to Reiki in general. So when it's your clair sense, again, getting to know that discernment process, that perceiving of when it is your intuition and when it might be that taking on of others or just the world in general. And then the clair physical feeling, that clair sentience. Those are kind of the areas. All of the clair senses have that discernment process within them. So they all have that piece where you have to kind of know when it is those spiritual downloads, when it is that intuition versus, the other side of those pieces, kind of like, I would say, I hesitate to say the shadow pieces because they're all relevant, they're all important in their own way, but those maybe more unhealed pieces of our clair senses. So, there's ways that you can work with that perceiving. You can really check in with your body, meditation, Reiki energy, automatic writing can be a huge piece of it, because even if you're in those like kind of unhealed versions of it, the automatic writing can help you really discern through that. Reiki journeying or other styles of journeying. There's a ton of different ways that you can really go into your perceptions in this, because that's where you get into the pieces of, am I making this up from the like kind of unhealed versions of it? And also, am I making this up in the fantastical pieces that might come through with it? As Colleen talked about last week, like there are some things that you just can't make up. Like she would be a grand novelist if she was able to make some of those up. And so you kind of have both sides to it, as far as getting to know yourself, getting to know how it works for you, getting to know that, or knowing that Reiki energies can start to awaken this piece of yourself anyway. And going through that perceiving and discernment process, and also using the tools that you have at your disposal, Reiki energy being one of them, but there's many others, having the tools for that so that you can really start to look at that for yourself and also how it works for you, because it works differently for every single person. And so I know for me, the Reiki energy, or not just the Reiki energy, but the Reiki journey techniques, Reiki journeying and guided Reiki journeys, all of that have been super, super helpful within that. So anyways, so that's kind of this week's topic. It was a little bit of a part two from last week, as far as, what Colleen kind of talked about last week, and how the Reiki energy kind of opens this parts of us, and what are spiritual downloads, what are psychic downloads, and what are our intuitive impressions and spiritual impressions. So you can check out her video from last week if you missed it. Just by the way, that's on our YouTube channel. It's Reiki Lifestyle YouTube channel. And then that free download, you can check out on our website. It's under the Reiki library, and you'll see a little menu that says free downloads. And so you can go check out the clairsenses and maybe even start to get an idea of like what your clairsense is, what your intuition looks like for you. And then, we're going to start to sending out more information about the Next Step Reiki classes, which teach you really in-depth Reiki journeying skills.